Hello everyone and welcome to another video by Mimi Cyber. Today we are going to be discussing the OSI model and we are going to be talking about the 7 layers of the OSI model. So this video is going to be divided into two parts. In part 1, which is the video right now, we are going to be going over layers 5 to 7, and in the next video, part 2, we are going to be going over layers 1 to 4. So let's just get right started into it. So before we begin talking about the 7 layers of the OSI model, we actually need to understand what exactly the OSI model is. So OSI stands for Open Systems Interconnection, and it's actually a conceptual framework that is created by the International Organization for Standardization. So the ISO is an independent, non-governmental organization that is composed of representatives from various national standards organization. And what the ISO actually does is they develop and publish international standards across a wide range of different industries. So we're talking about the technology industry, the manufacturing, healthcare, food safety, and environmental management. And the OSI model, what it helps us do, it kind of standardizes the functions of network communications. So kind of think of it like a step-by-step guide for sending a message from one computer to another. The OSI model helps us to understand, and it breaks down exactly how these computers talk to each other and how they communicate into different steps, which are the 7 different layers we'll eventually talk about. So these are the 7 layers of the OSI model, and I'll be doing a brief rundown from the 7th layer to the 1st layer. So for the 7th layer, this is known as the application layer. And what the application layer does is it provides network services directly to end users. So think of when you are sending an email, when you are web browsing, the application layer is in charge of this, and it's also kind of known as the end user interaction layer. This next layer is the 6th layer, which is the presentation layer. And what this layer does, it translates, encrypts, or compresses data in a format that can be understood by the application layer. The 5th layer is the session layer. So the session layer, basically, in its name, it establishes, it maintains, and terminates communication sessions between applications. The transport layer, which is the 4th layer, provides end-to-end communication between source and destination hosts. The next layer is the 3rd layer, which is the network layer, and it handles the routing of data packets between different networks. This 2nd layer is the data link layer, and this layer is responsible for reliable transmission of data across a physical link. And the last layer, which is the layer 1, is the physical layer, and this layer deals with the physical transmission of data over a communication channel. So a common mnemonic I actually use when I'm trying to remember the 7 layers of the OSI model is actually this, which is: all people seem to need data processing. So when I say that out loud, it just basically makes me remember what all the layers are, which is the application, from the presentation, the session, the transports, and the network, and so on. So that is basically what I use when I'm trying to remember it. So the first layer we would be going over is layer 7, which is the application layer. So the application layer, just like I mentioned earlier, is kind of like the human interaction layer. And this is the primary function of the layer. It provides network services to the end user. And it also is in charge of the user authentication and authorization. The services that this layer provides include various protocols and interfaces that enable communication and data exchange between the different apps running on separate devices on a network. The next function the application layer does is it's abstraction. And what this basically means is it abstracts the complexities of the lower level protocols and network details from the end users. It presents a simplified interface that allows applications to interact with the network without needing to understand the intricacies or the complexities of lower layers. So looking at the application layer protocols, These are the common protocols used in the application layer. We have the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, which is HTTP. Everyone probably already knows this, which is used for web browsing. We have the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, which is used for sending emails. We have the protocols that are used for retrieving emails, which are the Post Office Protocol, also known as POP, and the Internet Message Access Protocol, also known as IMAP. We have the protocol that is used for transferring files, which is the File Transfer Protocol. Also, probably shouldn't be using this because these are kind of like insecure and they transfer messages in clear text. So if you're looking for a safer protocol to use, you should probably be using the SFTP or the FTPS. We have the domain name system, which is basically a protocol that translates domain names to IP addresses. So for example, if you're going to the web browser and trying to navigate to www.cnn.com, the DNS is going to be the protocol that will translate the domain name, which is cnn.com, into an IP address in order for your web browser to connect to that site. We have the Secure Shell Protocol, which is used for the secure remote access to other network devices. And we have the Simple Network Management Protocol, which is the SNMP protocol and is used for the network management. So the next layer is the presentation layer. And just as I mentioned earlier, the presentation layer has to do with data compression, encryption, formatting. It handles the data compression for bandwidth or transmission time to enable a fast transmission time of the data. And it handles data encryption for confidentiality to ensure that no one that doesn't need to access the data accesses the data. It handles data formatting and encoding. It ensures that the data is formatted in a way that the application layer will be able to understand, and also character encoding to ensure compatibility between different systems on the network. The presentation layer is also in charge of syntax checking. It handles syntax checking and data validation, as I mentioned earlier, to ensure that it follows specified formats. And the presentation layer has to do with data representation. It presents data in a format that can be understood by the application layer. So because the presentation layer actually has to do with data formatting, compression, it doesn't really have a lot of protocols on working on this layer, but there are standards that the presentation layer works with. And one of them is the ASCII and Unicode, which you've probably heard of, and is a character encoding standard. We have file formats like JPEG, PNG, GIF, and we have compression data files, which are the zip that you've probably heard of. So the next layer we're going to be talking about is layer 5, which is the session layer. So the session layer, as I mentioned earlier, has to do with session establishment, maintenance, and termination. And it basically establishes, maintains, and terminates the session communications between hosts. The session layer is also in charge of checkpointing and data recovery. And what checkpointing means, it basically involves periodically saving the current states of a session in order for the session to be resumed in case of failure or interruption, and it allows the session to be resumed from the last known good state. So imagine you are communicating or sending a text message to a friend of yours, and over the course of sending that message, it wasn't received because of bad network. So the session layer is going to be the one to save the current state of that session communication between your device and your friend's device. So when the network goes back, the session layer resumes from the last known good states. A session layer is also in charge of synchronization. So when data is transferred over a network, it may arrive like out of sequence due to factors such as network congestion, routing delays, or packet reordering. actually, when data is actually transferred over the network, it can be transferred in form of packets, and those packets are usually divided into form of segments that have different numbers, and these numbers, when they arrive to the recipients, they're actually not in ordered chronologically. So what the session layer basically does, it ensures that the receiving application can correctly reassemble the data in the order intended by the sender. So the session layer, as I mentioned earlier, has to do with the session maintenance and termination and establishment. So there are not really a lot of protocols that are working in this layer, but there are a few notable ones. The first one is the remote procedure call, which is RPC, and is a protocol that allows a computer program to cause a procedure to execute on another computer without the programmer coding the details for the remote interaction. And what this protocol also involves, it involves session management aspects such as establishing and terminating remote procedure calls. The next protocol we have is the NetBIOS session service, and BIOS stands for Basic Input Output System, and is a protocol suite developed by IBM. The protocol is responsible for establishing, maintaining, and terminating sessions between computers on a network. So this protocol is not really used nowadays. It's commonly used in older Microsoft networking environments. So you basically won't see it a lot in newer network devices. And that is all for part 1 of the OSI model, where we covered layers 5 to 7. Let me know in the comments section if you have any questions concerning the OSI model or layers 5 to 7. And stay tuned for part 2 of the video, where we will go over layers 1 to 4. Bye now.